We turned them first into something like an island. Then a fierce fighting took place during last night, as I have mentioned, in a very new, innovative way. And I meant by that, as I have indicated yesterday, by martyrdom.
Now, Saddam Hussein has issued another statement. It was read in his name tonight on Iraqi television. The criminals, he meant the US and Britain, will be humiliated. To hurt the enemy more, he called on his people to raise the level of your attacks. Reporting live from Amman, Jordan, Simon Marks. Tony, back to you.
Simon, thank you. The most dramatic news today, we've mentioned it several times, but it is worth reiterating. The Army's 3rd Infantry Division made its way through the heart of Baghdad. And our own correspondent, Greg Kelly, he's embedded with the 3rd ID. He filed this report earlier today.
We came in early this morning, a massive convoy. Now check out the action. Basically, we've been destroying military vehicles on either side of the convoy. You can see smoke scattered about the horizon. We've seen military vehicles. We've also seen a lot of civilian white pickup trucks come at us almost on suicide missions. Fire returned by Bradley fighting vehicles as well as tanks. Now, some of these vehicles that have come at us were clearly civilian vehicles that did not mean hostile intent. In those cases, we saw warning shots fired. The operators of the armored vehicles waving their hands, go back, and they returned to where they were coming from uninjured. But a lot of those vehicles were coming at us clearly with hostile intent. For now, the cleanup really of Baghdad is underway, trying to get out remnants of the Medina Division, any other Republican Guard who are here. We're told that a Republican Guard general is now in custody. We can't tell whether he is telling this soldier that's a gas mask, and he's got green trousers on. That's definitely a soldier, telling him to lay down his weapon and get on the deck. The first time we've seen that.
There's a guy that's right there in the bushes. Right
Watch
there.
out, there's a guy, don't shoot him.
Come on behind him.
Another surrender. They're both keeping their hands up. Unbelievable. Now, a lot of these soldiers, though, didn't give up like that. They came at us with rocket-propelled grenades, AK-47s. One tank has been disabled. However, the crew made it out fine. They're still on their way. It's being towed by another tank. Again, one general in custody right now. Unclear whether he surrendered like those guys or whether he was captured. What we're seeing now are a lot of these secondary explosions in these vehicles on either side of the road. They were destroyed by some of the tanks in front of us. Either their fuel tanks or munitions inside continue to explode as we pass by. But once again, this fight has been taken into the heart of Baghdad. We're not on the outskirts. We're not in greater Baghdad. This is it. This is Baghdad. This is what these guys came here for. We'll be here for a while. Reporting from Baghdad, Greg Kelly, Fox News.
Well, there's been a lot of discussion about the Battle of Baghdad. So far, it has been one that doesn't include a lot of firefight, but who knows what's going to happen. Joining us now to explain what exactly is going on is the author of Modern U.S. Urban Warfare Doctrine, retired Major General Bob Scales. Also joining me here in the studio, Colonel John Garrett. He was commander of the American Combat Unit that breached Iraqi defenses and ultimately secured the Kuwait International Airport in 1991. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us. General Scales, let me begin with you. Right now, we've seen the 3rd ID make a swing today through the city of Baghdad. Tell me what was accomplished in terms of military objectives today simply by making that move through the city and returning to the airport.
Well, I think really 2 things, Tony. The first and most important element of this incursion is to find out what the real enemy situation was inside the city. I mean, we've heard stories about thousands, tens of thousands of the Republican Guard being inside the city, but we didn't actually know, number one, how they were disposed, what they were doing, and most importantly, what was their morale. And you can get all kinds of overhead shots from drones and so forth to count noses, but unless you actually go into the enemy's midst and engage him, you don't get a real sense of what his morale is. And I think this dipstick came out, and I think the enemy came out about 3 quarts low. The second thing that we did was to demonstrate to the Iraqis that we're not there to knock on the door of Baghdad, we're there to kick the door in. And the demonstration of our ability to choose the time, choose the place of our incursion into Baghdad was sending a signal to the military and the Ba'athist leadership that they were no longer in control of the situation, that the clock now belonged to us. We had the initiative. And as evidence of that, I think what you've seen here lately is stories about Ba'athist leaders and military leaders mixing in with the civilian population and trying to escape through the last avenue of escape up to the north just to get the heck out of Baghdad as fast as they can.
Colonel Garrett, we also heard Chris Yumpel report just a few minutes ago that the lights have gone out in the western portions of Baghdad. That would be the area that leads to the airport. If you're trying to prepare operations right now, what are you thinking about in terms of maintaining the defense of that airport, but also maintaining the ability to continue going into Iraq and, as General Scales pointed out, to continue to kick in the door, as it were?
Well, the first order of business is to have security out. If your objective is the airport or any other critical node, you need to make sure you've got enough forces, enough capacity to secure what you've gained, to improve on it, and then, of course, to continue the momentum forward.
All right, so again, if you're taking a look at that western section of town, what weapons do we have to bear? Let us just suppose that Republican Guards actually are somehow coalescing in that portion of the city and trying to either lie in wait for our forces or try to make some move on the airport.
I agree with Bob Scales. I think the most difficult and most important thing to determine now what the will of the enemy is. And probably the most effective way to do that are through these sort of small, limited incursions, to smoke him out, to find out where he is, what his intentions are, and then go to the next step.
General Scales, we've heard a lot of talk about a tipping point in Iraq, a point at which military personnel will say to themselves, no mas, not going to do it anymore.
Right.
Have we reached that point?
I think we're close, Tony. You know, that the phrase we use in the military is tipping point or culminating point. It's that point at which the enemy is forced either to look for a decisive moment or simply to give up, break and run. Remember, we've said many times the whole purpose of war is a test of will, and if we've broken the enemy's will and his will to resist, and if he's only left with one option, and that's to die or surrender, then I think we've reached that point. If we're not there, Tony, right now, I think we're just pretty darn close.
A couple more excursions. Colonel Garrett, I noticed that one Iraqi soldier who was surrendering on the roadside had a gas mask. What does that tell you? Anything?
He probably has some idea that there's going to be a threat to that effect. It's maybe part of his standard issue. From one end of the spectrum, he may not even know what it's really for. At the other end, it might be part of what he has left over to, in his way of looking at things, fight the war.
General Scales, the use of weapons of mass destruction, that's a pretty good proxy for a tipping point. If they're not used in the next couple of days, it would mean either they didn't have them in the first place or they've lost the will to use them, correct?
Well, I think it's the latter. You know, when people ask me this question, I sort of put myself in the place of the Iraqi battery commander commanding those guns with chemical shells, trying to decide whether or not to follow orders to launch those shells. And I just think the command and control is broken down to the point where the authority to fire those rounds is with some poor Iraqi artillery captain, and he's not about to be the first person to engage American forces with chemical munitions and suffer the fate of being tried as a war criminal.
General Bob Scales, Colonel John Garrett, thank you both for joining us. Still ahead on Weekend Live's coverage of Operation Iraqi Freedom, we're going to go live to Charleston, West Virginia. At 1:30, there'll be a news conference from the family of rescued Private First Class Jessica Lynch. Stay tuned for that. Plus, we're going to have more exclusive video from the 3rd Infantry Division as it stormed the city of Baghdad, cut through the heart of the capital, and returned safely to the airport. Stay tuned.
Support.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Gomez. Here now the latest developments on U.S. troops in Operation Iraqi Freedom. U.S. Major General Victor Renoir saying U.S. forces can move throughout Baghdad at times and places of their choosing. Fox's Greg Kelly, one of our embedded reporters, brought you the first look at U.S. troops pushing their furthest yet into the Iraqi capital. The video stunning, showing the 3rd Infantry Division rumbling up a southern road that leads directly to the heart of the city. despite that video, Iraqi military officials going on television asserting that U.S. troops are not in Baghdad and do not have control of the airport. CENTCOM says U.S. troops made the incursion to send a clear message to Saddam Hussein and his forces. We are in your backyard. Also, a British government spokesman says the incursion was symbolic to make it clear to the Iraqi people that whatever the regime may say, coalition forces are advancing. The 1st Brigade combat team controls most of the airport, but Iraqis are still putting up a fight in the outlying areas. U.S. warplanes hitting Iraqi tanks on the northern edge of the airport. On the other side of the city, the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force also pushing closer to the middle of Baghdad, only 12 miles away. They battled Republican Guard troops for several hours, eventually taking control of major intersections. Outside the city perimeter, coalition forces still going up against remnants of Hussein's supporters. About 35 miles from the capital in Suwaira, units of the 3rd Infantry captured the headquarters of the Republican Guard's Medina Division, said to be one of Hussein's best trained troops. Though they were nowhere to be found, the headquarters abandoned. U.S. troops speculating members of the Republican Guard quickly changed into civilian clothes and were waving to U.S. troops from along the roadside. Also, battles continue with Iraqi holdouts in Kut and Basra. Coalition forces working to get those areas under control to make way for humanitarian assistance. And don't forget the Kurds and allied forces coming from the north of Baghdad. That's the latest on troops fighting in Operation Iraqi Freedom. I'm Rebecca Gomez in Fox Central.
President Bush is spending the day at Camp David getting updates on the war, gearing up for a busy diplomatic week, and of course today, the weekly radio address. Joining us to talk about that from the North Lawn of the White House, Fox News correspondent Molly Henneberg. Molly?
Hi, Tony. Yes, he does have a very busy diplomatic week ahead. The president will travel to Northern Ireland, and then when he returns from that trip, he'll welcome a number of world leaders here to the White House. But today, the president is spending the weekend at Camp David, where he can keep up to date on the war from briefings that he gets throughout the day. And also, if he wants to, he can have a secure video conference with his war council here in Washington and with General Tommy Franks over in Qatar. Today, in his weekly radio address, the president said the coalition is bringing hope to the people of Iraq.
Village by village, city by city, liberation is coming. The people of Iraq have my pledge. Our fighting forces will press on until their oppressors are gone and their whole country is free.
The Bush administration is making plans for an interim authority to take over in Iraq, perhaps before Saddam Hussein's regime is completely ousted. That authority will be made up mainly of Iraqis, both from inside and outside of the country. And the U.S. and the coalition will help with security and help the interim authority run municipal services for the country until Iraq decides upon, votes, and installs a permanent government. The White House says the role of the United Nations has not been determined yet, but likely it will assist with humanitarian issues and perhaps with some matters of rebuilding. Meanwhile, some Iraqi exiles and Iraqi Americans met with President Bush yesterday. They told the commander-in-chief stories about their terror and torture at the hands of Saddam Hussein's regime, and they thanked the president and the military for liberating the country.
I think the regime is collapsing. I think the regime is collapsing, and freedom is going to be soon, and Iraqis are eager to be free and to be liberated.
Democracy is not a genetic inherited condition. It's something you learn and you practice and you go on with it. And during that time, there's clearly going to be the need for a stabilizing force as the government in Iraq stands up independently on its feet.
Couple other notes. The president will meet in Northern Ireland with British Prime Minister Tony Blair on Monday and Tuesday to discuss the war. And then when he returns from that trip, he will welcome a couple leaders to the White House. First, he'll welcome the leader of the Slovak Republic, an ally of ours in the Coalition of the Willing. And then he'll welcome leaders from several Central American countries, including Costa Rica, El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua. Live from the White House, I'm Molly Henneberg. Tony, back to you.
Molly, thank you very much. One of the new doctrines in this particular war is the notion of a rolling start and a rolling victory. Typically, one is accustomed to flash starts and decisive victories. Is this a good idea? We're going to talk about military doctrine and also diplomatic strategy with Fox News contributor, syndicated columnist, Pulitzer Prize winner Charles Krauthammer. Charles, let's first talk about the whole idea of a rolling start. The rolling start seems to have worked reasonably well. Can you have a rolling stop and a rolling victory?
I don't think I've ever heard of a rolling stop. We certainly didn't have a rolling stop in Berlin or in Tokyo in the Second World War. That was a pretty sudden stop. The idea, I guess, of the rolling victory is that we're going to take pieces of Baghdad, we're going to gradually take it over, isolate Saddam. The Secretary of State said yesterday it doesn't really matter if we catch Saddam or not. I can't believe he said that. It does matter whether we catch him. One of the reasons the people in the South have not come out and supported us, they need to see Saddam's head on a stake before anybody will come out. They're afraid otherwise. We have to have a sudden stop, and it has to end with Saddam's life.
Now, you have mentioned the reaction in the South. A lot of people have been skeptical of that, but it's worth reminding viewers that after the Gulf War, the South had the most vehement uprisings against Saddam Hussein, and they had the most vehement repressions, at least 50,000 people, according to human rights estimates, dying at the hands of Iraqi Republican Guards units. So the image of Saddam, not alive, dead, or perhaps even alive but in captivity and presumably then dispensed to the tender mercies of the Iraqi people, what would that do to the South? But more importantly, what would that do in the region?
I think it would have an unbelievable effect, particularly among ordinary Iraqis, in the South, also in Baghdad. What's really interesting is the reports of the welcoming of our soldiers as we approach Baghdad when people ended up behind our lines, behind our tanks. Once you've got an Abrams between you and Saddam, well, then you can express your real feelings about America and about liberty. But people are worried that the Abrams and the Americans are going to leave. In 1991, as you pointed out, the Bush administration, the first Bush administration, encouraged a revolt, and we abandoned them. They feel betrayed. And when they saw our tanks skirt the cities in the south, not go into Basra, but around it on the way to Baghdad, not a bad idea from a military strategy. But when these people in the south saw that we didn't liberate their cities, but we went around them, they worried. Are we really going to stay? Are we really going to liberate them? Until we have the sudden victory and Saddam gone, we're not going to have their allegiance. Also, as you say, in the region, until he is gone, this will not be seen as a victory, and it will not have any of the impact on the other states, on the region that we hope for.
Let's talk about diplomacy. Already, the French, the Russians, the UN all say we need to have a leadership stake in the post-Iraqi reconstruction. So far, the Bush administration, including Secretary of State Colin Powell, have said, no, sorry, you guys didn't join the coalition. You're going to have to stand on the outside. Tony Blair, on the other hand, the president's most loyal supporter throughout all this in the international community, still wants the UN to have a role. How do you handle that diplomatically?
Look, Blair's been a terrific ally, a courageous guy, and a wonderful articulator of the policy. But he brought us into a bad state when he encouraged us to go to the UN for the second resolution, the one that never happened. That was a diplomatic catastrophe. We have to say to Blair, look, we understand why you want to return to the UN. You've got your left in the Labour Party, and you promised them you'd go back to the UN. But look what happened when you accommodated your left last time. It was a disaster. We're not going to be able to win this war in the end unless we administer Iraq and we do it in a way that brings them genuinely a decent society. That's not what the French are interested in. That's not what the Russians are interested in, or the others. If we let them have a say in the running of Iraq, it's going to end up something like what we have today. We're not going to have the democracy that we're promising. The way to win the war, and in the end, the way to win the public relations war, is to show the world we were honest and serious and sincere in wanting to liberate Iraq. And we can only do that if we and the Brits, who are the only ones interested in real democracy, administer the place.
All right, Charles Krauthammer, thank you very much. Coming up, stay tuned. We're going to have more of Weekend Live. We'll talk to a former radio show host who refused to run NPR updates during his show and instead told listeners to tune into Fox for all the latest news. We're also going to bring you an upcoming press conference, we think, with the family of Private First Class Jessica Lynch. And, of course, we'll continue to bring you exclusive video from Greg Kelly, who was with the 3rd Infantry Division. He was in Baghdad today. You're seeing pictures there. We'll continue bringing them to you throughout the day right here on your source for fair and balanced news.
Hi, I'm Aviation Administrationman Jonathan Colson aboard the USS Kitty Hawk. I'd just like to say hi to my mom and dad and everybody back in Houston, Texas.
By winning the 24-Hour of Le Mans 3 years in a row with the same driving team, we rewrote history. We are about to rewrite it again.
Right now during Lobster Fest, we've got the best thing to appear on pizza since pepperoni. It's lobster. Try our new delicious lobster pizza appetizer, topped with fresh tomatoes, basil, Parmesan, and did we mention lobster? Lobster pizza right now at Red Lobster.
HP technology and HP people help BMW Williams run every race before the driver ever gets in the car.
Wish your dentures were this comfortable? Bob's denture adhesive is Seabond.
Bought it for hold, love it for comfort.
Only Seabond clings wall-to-wall with 3 strong adhesives in a thin velvet soft wafer. No gaps, no ooze. Seabond, buy it for hold.
Love it for comfort.
Sick of messy denture baths? The Seabond bath has a special handle that locks on for easy cleaning with no messy spills.
Let's get a check on the latest headlines. For that, we go to Karen Chetry, who's standing by at the Fox News desk in New York. Karen?
Hi, Tony, and hello, everyone. With coalition forces already inside of Baghdad, we're getting word of more explosions in the Iraqi capital. Reportedly happened about 300 feet outside of a Palestine hotel. That's where the Iraqi information minister gives his press conferences. They believe that it was a bomb that went off there. There are also many journalists who stay at that hotel as well. Earlier, American tanks plowed their way through Iraqi defenses on their way to Baghdad. CENTCOM says the objective of the coalition is not to hold ground, but to isolate Saddam Hussein's soldiers and to prevent reinforcements from arriving. British troops discovering what appears to be a makeshift morgue at an abandoned Iraqi military base in the south. An Iraqi exile group saying it may be the first of many, exposing the brutality of Saddam Hussein's regime. The skulls, bundles of bones, and strips of military uniform were dumped in plastic bags and unsealed coffins. A team of forensic specialists are now on the scene. They're going to be looking for evidence of atrocities carried out by that regime. And in northern Iraq, American planes pounded enemy positions about 20 miles east of the city of Mosul. The army has been working with Kurdish militias in the region to take on the Iraqis. And today, hundreds of American soldiers were sent north to help reinforce those coalition positions. And U.S. troops capturing the headquarters of the Republican Guard's Medina Division. That headquarters located about 35 miles southeast of Baghdad. Members of the 3rd Infantry Division reportedly took the base with no Iraqi opposition. And British troops waiting to get the green light and make another push into the center of the city of Basra. Many of the town's residents have already gotten out, abandoning their homes and leaving for the coalition-controlled outskirts. As many as 1,000 soldiers loyal to Saddam are said to be holed up in Basra. And those are your latest headlines from Operation Iraqi Freedom. I'm Karen Chetry.
Well, as Karen just mentioned, British forces did in fact discover a makeshift morgue in southern Iraq today. Joining us with more details on that story, Fox News correspondent Jonathan Hunt. He's standing by live in Kuwait City with details. Jonathan?
Hey, Tony, it was a gruesome find indeed for British soldiers of the Royal Horse Artillery. They were on patrol near the town of Zubair, that's about 10 miles southwest of Basra, and inside an abandoned Iraqi military base, they found around 200 coffin-like boxes. Inside those boxes were bags of human body parts and bones. Now, it appears that the victims were killed some time ago. A catalogue that was also found at the site reportedly lists the names of some of those victims with explanations of how they died. One reportedly says simply, executed with a shot to the head. A team of pathologists has headed to the area, as well as Arabic translators. Now, this may be significant. Zubair was, after the 1991 Gulf War, the site of an uprising by Shiites. That revolt was brutally crushed by Saddam Hussein's troops, and reportedly at the time thousands were killed. Now, British military officials say they are still compiling all the information they can before they draw any conclusions.
I really wouldn't like to speculate on where the bones have come from. All I could say is it's not from the current war, because obviously the state of the bones and they've decomposed.
Now, British troops at the gates of Basra, Iraq's second city, have been taking down the symbols of Saddam Hussein's regime, toppling a huge statue of the Iraqi leader and storming the homes and offices of Ba'ath Party members. They've also set up more checkpoints as they tighten their grip on the area. The 7th Armoured Brigade, known as the Desert Rats, are waiting for their orders to launch a final assault on the city. And also the almost constant air assault on Iraqi positions continues. These F-14s flying from the USS Constellation, speeding across southern Iraq over still burning oil wells, targeting Iraqi military units as they advance towards US forces in the Baghdad area. The F-14s carry 500-pound laser-guided bombs. They're seeking to destroy Iraqi artillery and armor. Now, it's the sort of close air support which puts huge pressure on those F-14 pilots as they target Iraqi forces very close to US troop positions. Obviously, they do not want to do anything that could lead to another friendly fire incident. So those pilots tell us that if they're not absolutely sure of hitting their targets, they simply return to their carrier without dropping those powerful bombs. Tony, back to you.
Jonathan, thank you very much. We're expecting in a very few minutes a press conference out of Palestine, West Virginia. The family of PFC Jessica Lynch will be speaking to members of the press. But before we get to that, a very interesting story in the Detroit area, actually Ypsilanti, Michigan. At WEMU, the radio station at Eastern Michigan University, recently fired radio. First, let's listen, go back a day or two and listen to what CENTCOM had to say about her rescue.
As the team entered the hospital room, they found Private Lynch in a hospital bed. The first man approached the door and came in and called her name. She had been scared, had the sheet up over her head because she didn't know what was happening. She lowered the sheet from her head. She didn't really respond yet because I think she was probably pretty scared. The soldier again said, "Jessica Lynch, we're the United States soldiers here, and we're here to protect you and take you home." She seemed to understand that. And as he walked over, took his helmet off, she looked up to him and said, "I'm an American soldier too." As they prepared to evacuate her, a team member made a preliminary assessment of her medical conditions. The physician who accompanied them on, this is our physician who accompanied the assault, took the opportunity to further evaluate her condition, stabilize her for evacuation. She had injuries both to her legs, her arm, a head injury, and seemed to be in a fair amount of pain. After she was prepared for movement and secured to the stretcher, the team members carried her down the stairwell out to the front door to the waiting helicopter. While the helicopter transported her to a nearby aircraft who was then going to move her on to a field hospital, Jessica held up her hand and grabbed the ranger doctor's hand, held on it to her for the entire time and said, "Please don't let anybody leave me." It was clear she knew where she was and she didn't want to be left anywhere in the hands of the enemy. After a short period of time, the hospital departed and she was moved back to the field hospital and her treatment was expanded.
So there again you have kind of a quick summary of what happened to Private First Class Jessica Lynch as she...
Greg, give us a statement how you feel today, getting ready to head out.
I feel real good. This has been a long waiting process, so we're looking forward to meeting up with our daughter over there and get her back here.
Would you consider this a happy occasion, a sad occasion? How are you looking at this in that term?
Well, it's a happy occasion in a way.
I'm real happy about
Yeah.
it. I mean, I can't wait. I mean, I know it's it's going to be sad too because of the the circumstances, but no, I'm happy to see her. Can't wait.
The details came out today, Greg, that the rest of the 507th, those listed as missing, their status was changed to killed in action. 8 soldiers. That word came out today. I know you've talked all along about those families as well, those soldiers. Can you talk more about not only Jessie but her unit and the sacrifice it made?
I wasn't aware of this, but okay. Our hearts are really saddened for her other troop members and the other families.
As we watch in West Virginia, the family of Jessica Lynch, Private First Class, and we're seeing video of when she was arrested.
Clearly very emotional.
Yes,
right there.
and it sounds like he may not have been aware of the people who were classified as killed in action.
Thank you.
Obviously, an emotional experience for all of them. I mean, this is their daughter. These are people who are not accustomed to being in the limelight, not ready for PR, not ready to meet the press. These are people that lived their own life in West Virginia, had a daughter, unassuming, popular, goes into the service. She drives a truck there, and suddenly she's captured, and the people with her are killed. She puts up a fight, according to all accounts, and injured badly, apparently through torture, and now they get a chance to go see her. And the rest of this is superfluous to them, obviously.
Definitely, as they get ready to visit their daughter at a military hospital in Germany, a daughter who apparently is in very high spirits considering all that she's been through, as you've said, Bob. Tortured, as we've heard. She has 2 broken legs, broken arm, fractured right foot, spine injuries. She underwent hours and hours of surgery and apparently came out of it smiling, requesting turkey, steamed carrots, applesauce, glasses. She wanted to read her local hometown newspaper, apparently. She made a request for that. Of course, considering all she's been through, when she gets home, she'll have to go through lots and lots of rehabilitation. But definitely a very brave young 19-year-old woman. You know, apparently it was said, and this is just so incredible of a soldier, she was hiding under a sheet when the commando team came to get her, when they stormed into that hospital room, and they said, you know, we are American soldiers, we're here to get you, and she said, you know, I'm an American soldier too.
Yeah. Yeah,
and here we see some live pictures of Baghdad.
Right, where we have seen some activity. For those that didn't see it, we had exclusive video. You saw the report from Greg Kelly just a few moments ago. And Greg and his unit took a trip into Baghdad today. They went into what could be considered part of the center of Baghdad, as you see some of the explosions there in the background, threw it in a horseshoe-type way into the center of Baghdad and out to the airport. That's some of the video there on the left-hand side. To go through it to show that the Americans are there. They are not turning back. They are not doing incursions and exploring. They are there, and they plan on being there and taking control of territory, including the airport. We'll keep an eye on Baghdad there. Now, let's get back to Jonathan Hunt. He's at Kuwait City. We had to interrupt Jonathan. There was quite a discovery in southern Iraq. Jonathan, maybe if you will, take us from the top about that story, if you will.
Sure, Bob. Yeah, British troops were on what was essentially a routine patrol near the town of Zubair, that's about 10 miles south of Basra, when they made what really is one of the most gruesome discoveries of this war so far. Inside what was an abandoned Iraqi military base, they found around 200 coffin-like boxes, and inside those boxes they found bags full of human body parts and bones. Now, it looks as though the victims had been dead for some time. A catalogue was also found at the scene, listing the names of some of the victims and also how they died. One entry reportedly simply says, executed with a shot to the head. Now, a team of pathologists has headed to the area, as well as some Arabic translators. Now, and this may be significant. Zubair, back after the 1991 Gulf War, was the scene of a Shiite uprising. That revolt was brutally put down by Saddam Hussein's troops at the time, and apparently thousands were killed. Now, British military officials say they are still compiling all the information they can before they draw any conclusions.
It appears that they've been stacked there for some reason, probably to hide them away. But certainly they look as though they've been there for some time. They're certainly not as a result of recent action.
Now, British troops at the gates of Basra, Iraq's second city, have been taking down the symbols of Saddam Hussein's regime, toppling a huge statue of the Iraqi leader and storming the homes of Ba'ath Party members and Fedayeen militia, arresting around 70 suspects, taking them away for questioning. They've also set up more checkpoints as they tighten their grip on the city. The 7th Armoured Brigade, known as the Desert Rats, are now waiting for their final orders to launch an assault on the city itself. The almost constant air assault on Iraqi positions also continues. These F-14s flying over southern Iraq from the USS Constellation, over the still burning oil wells in the south, then hitting Iraqi positions in the Baghdad area as some of those military units move towards US forces around Baghdad. The F-14s, by the way, carry 500-pound laser-guided weapons. They're seeking to destroy Iraqi artillery and armor. These sorties, obviously, an important part of the battle for Baghdad, paving the way for the troops' ultimate assault and ultimate taking of the capital. That's the latest live from Kuwait City. Back to you guys in New York.
Jonathan Hunt, thank you.
All right, let's get some insight now.
On coats. We don't know why people are wearing the longer, warmer clothing. We've heard other reports that even today when it's hot there's still people wearing long clothing. Yeah. So we can't really take a lot from that. However, what we know is that the intelligence agencies within the United States government have the ability to track movement 24 hours a day via satellite imaging and via the unmanned drones. And so what they're able to do is go back in time to take a look at they will identify this particular location in Baghdad. They'll be able to focus on that location.
We only have so much time, Grant, and I wanted to move on. A speech that he gave. We have some video of that. Did you have a chance to see this?
Yes, I did.
Tell me what you thought.
Well, this again shows similar characteristics and unique characteristics on the left side of his face, just below his left mustache.
Okay, we're going to say you're going with that. So at the risk of interrupting you once again, what I consider the Groucho Marx video, can we bring that up, the one after the address where he was wearing these glasses? This was after his, what was it, the 19th when he was attacked. I don't know if we have that queued up, but the one where he's wearing the glasses and doesn't seem to have the charisma he once had. What did you think about that?
Well, that particular video obviously was of a person who was quite distressed. And he had all the unique characteristics that Saddam Hussein have. What we wanted to look at is this image here, the one that we just looked at. If we can go back to that for a second, that image is of a person who does not have the similar characteristics that we've seen before. There is no mole below his left sideburn. He does not have that mole by the left eyebrow. When you compare this image to the image we saw of him holding the child yesterday, or that was released by Al Jazeera yesterday, that is an inconsistent image. We don't know who this person is here.
So, judging from what you've seen, you'd say the most recent tape is legitimate?
The most recent tape would be legitimate from what we know of him. Again, look at the birthmarks we know that he has. This person has them. We don't know when it was shot. This person here does not have them. So this person may not be the same one.
It does strike me, though, that the guy that was walking yesterday didn't seem to have the same charisma as the guy that the video we've seen in the past where he's out there with a gun shooting it in the air for no particular reason. What do you think the purpose of this kind of walk is?
Well, I think that clearly this is a man under great stress. And, you know, I noticed one image here during this crowd scene where he was on top of a vehicle looking up into the sky quite nervously. You'll see here in a moment. I think that's a pretty telltale sign that this is a man under a great deal of pressure and certainly wouldn't have the charisma and the confidence that Saddam Hussein would have perhaps months ago.
Yeah, well, his world is changing, and hopefully the world of the Iraqi people as well. Grant Fredericks, thank you very much. Some interesting observations.
Thank you.
All right, this is what they came for. You are looking...
As well as his sons, and remember, the question was whether his sons had survived the initial attack on the bunker or wherever they happened to be that particular Wednesday that the efforts in this Iraqi freedom started.
There it looks like he's, what, smoking a cigar? He looks relatively relaxed as he was yesterday. Hard to tell. Interesting, in that last interview you had, the gentleman was talking about the moles. Hard to see here whether or not he's got the moles or not, but certainly he's making a case to let everybody know that, in fact, he survived, his military aide survived, and also his two sons survived, as you were saying. But once again, it's hard to tell when this video was actually shot, so we don't know whether or not this is the post-March 19th when we first went in and made an attempt to bomb Baghdad.
Yeah, a little while later we're going to be talking to Gerald Post about whether this is real, whether that's actually him. And keep in mind that whoever Saddam is releasing these tapes for, or whoever's in charge is releasing them for, we don't know who's seeing it. Because most of the electricity, if we can take a shot at Baghdad, don't know if we still have that, but the lights are out in most of Baghdad. Well, there's a few of them on, but you notice you don't see many buildings with them on. Is the TV broadcasting to anybody? Certainly not a whole lot of people. So we don't even know who's seeing these, but it seems like maybe the effort here was to address whether his sons were alive, but we don't know when this tape was actually made.
And in fact, as we take a look at those live pictures of Baghdad, there have been reports of actually two large explosions rocking the center of the capital city. So we'll certainly keep an eye on that and see what else we can see. Meantime, President Bush at Camp David this weekend, keeping in constant contact with his war council. A live report now from James Rosen at the White House. James.
Darian, Bob, good afternoon once again. President Bush preparing to head for Northern Ireland this coming Monday to confer with British Prime Minister Tony Blair for the third time in 4 weeks. As he does that today, President Bush is making use of the most modern communications capabilities available to him at Camp David to confer with other world leaders and with his own advisors. So at 8:05 Eastern Time this morning, President Bush began a 15-minute phone call with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin. A senior administration official tells Fox News President Bush thanked President Putin in this call for his, quote, ongoing efforts to crack down on Russian military hardware sales to the Iraqi regime, about which President Bush had complained to Mr. Putin in their last phone call. The president then convened a 25-minute session of his war council via secure video phone technology. After that, the president conferred by telephone with Spanish President Jose Maria Aznar. In his weekly Saturday morning radio address pre-recorded yesterday, President Bush vowed to keep up the pressure until regime change in Iraq has been accomplished.
American and coalition forces are steadily advancing against the regime of Saddam Hussein. With each new village they liberate, our forces are learning more about the atrocities of that regime and the deep fear the dictator has instilled in the Iraqi people. Yet no crime of this dying regime will divert us from our mission. We will not stop until Iraq is free.
In the Roosevelt Room of the White House yesterday, President Bush met with Iraqi Americans and so-called free Iraqis who shared with the president their stories of suffering under the regime of Iraqi President Saddam Hussein. One of the president's visitors urged him, "Don't just get in and jump out," to which President Bush replied, "I made that commitment." Another advised the president not to exclude from the post-war Iraqi government those Iraqis who don't speak English well. We're talking about people who don't speak English well. The president responded, "Some people say mine isn't very good either." This 50-minute meeting, Bob and Dari, ended with the president turning around to his visitors and without any prompting saying just one word to them. That word was soon. Reporting live from the White House, James Rosen, Fox News. Back to you in New York.
James, thank you for that.
Well, our own Greg Kelly embedded with the 3rd Infantry, with the troops when they stormed into Baghdad.
This is incredible. Greg shot this exclusive footage as they barreled into the city. Check this out.
There was a report that a Marine was lost today. There were about an estimated 1,000 Iraqis who lost their lives trying to oppose the 3rd Infantry as it went into Baghdad proper. Well, the coalition is inside the gates of Saddam's capital. So much territory under Allied control and so little time, really. What's ahead? Does it look like coalition soldiers will need to battle it out door to door? Joining us now is Rob Holmes. He's a tank platoon leader. He was in the '91 Gulf War, now a captain in the Army Reserves. Captain, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. What's your assessment right now?
We're doing a terrific job. We have gone farther and faster with fewer casualties than anyone thought we could, and the 3rd Infantry Division is now penetrated the city of Baghdad, and it doesn't look like there's anything that can stop them.
Okay. Could chemicals stop them?
It could slow us down, but we're prepared for it. We've trained for it. We've got the right equipment. But there's no question that chemicals or any type of weapon of mass destruction is definitely going to be the one wild card that's still left in this.
What about the door-to-door thing? That's something that a lot of people are afraid of.
Well, it's something that we should be concerned about. It reduces the advantage that we have in technology. When you're out in the open desert, you generally like to stay back about 1,500 to 2,000 meters and take advantage of the technology that we have with our weapon systems. As you get into an urban terrain, you lose that opportunity, so you have to go door to door. But one thing that we do know, a couple things that we know, we've trained for it, and the second thing is so far the Iraqi regime hasn't given us something that our soldiers can't handle.
Play this out for me. What are the weapons of choice for door-to-door battle?
An infantryman. An infantryman supported by mechanized forces and armor forces. But at the end of the day, hand-to-hand or urban combat hasn't really changed that much. It means kicking down doors, flushing out buildings, using hand grenades, on occasion using a bayonet. But as you pointed out earlier, it's always going to be a combined arms force. You're going to have tanks, you're going to have Bradleys, you're going to have helicopters above, you're going to have fixed-wing aircraft and artillery supporting. So it will always be a team. But when you're talking about urban combat, it means an infantryman going street to street, door to door, killing the enemy.
Secretary Rumsfeld said this week that coalition forces will settle for nothing less than unconditional surrender. What does that mean exactly? What has to happen?
The Iraqi regime has to give up everything. Everything from their weapons of mass destruction to their conventional forces to probably even their bank accounts.
But I mean, I really don't see them coming out and saying, okay, I give up.
Well, they haven't done that yet, and that's why we have to continue to prosecute this until they do.
Okay, Rob Holmes, I'm sorry, we've actually got to go. We appreciate you being here for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Troops and tanks rolling into Baghdad, the coalition facing little resistance from Saddam's most loyal fighters as they reach their ultimate destination.
Also coming up, we've got new videotapes raising new questions about the fate of Saddam Hussein. Was this really him, this one? And the new stuff, is it really him there? The Iraqi dictator actually survived the first night of the war?
Throughout the day, to the west of us, we hear sporadically, we've heard sporadically throughout the night, continued Allied air activity hitting heavy Iraqi formations there, armor and artillery very hard. We expect to hear more of the same. We expect to hear more of the same here. Indeed, we expect to see the Kurdish infantry together with their special forces allies from the coalition troops moving forward in the next few days. more intense Allied air activity to be expected. And indeed, from our vantage point here, we can very clearly see the Iraqi positions only a short distance away. So without a doubt, a tremendous beginning in earnest, in force for the Northern Front. Greg.
Chris Klein, somewhere in northern Iraq. Thanks very much for that report.
As we've been reporting all day, U.S. and British ground forces are making major gains on Baghdad and in the south in Basra. But the battle to liberate Iraq is being waged from the seas as well. Let's get a live report now from Fox's Jamie Nelson, who's aboard the carrier, the USS Truman. Hi, Jamie.
Hello and good afternoon from the Mediterranean. I can tell you that strike aircraft from Combined Task Force 60 here have been continuing to chip away at Iraq's military capabilities north of Baghdad. Now today, the Harry S. Truman and the Theodore Roosevelt launched about 120 strike aircraft. That's including F-14 Tomcats, F-A-18 Hornets, and EA-6B Prowlers into Iraq, there to support an unidentified but a growing number of special operations forces on the ground there. Now those forces, as you just heard Chris Klein describing, are locating military and even some terrorist targets, and then coordinating strikes with many of these planes patrolling overhead. Now, as the number of these special operations guys on the ground has increased over the last 2 weeks, so has the number of bombs dropped. Now, that until today, because some poor weather over the northern area limited pilots' ability to hit their targets or coordinate their strikes with those forward air controllers on the ground. As a result, many of the aircraft were returning to the flight deck of the Truman and also the Roosevelt, we're told, with more weapons than is usual still underneath the wings. But as you heard described from Chris Klein, that air power is still getting on target, still having an effect, and still achieving positive results for the coalition forces as they try to make their way south. Now, commanders expect the weather to improve over the next few days, and Navy and Marine pilots will be able to continue.
Oops. Well, it seems that we have lost the audio portion of Jamie's report there from the USS Truman. Occasionally, these technical glitches happen. He is thousands of miles away. But hopefully we'll be hearing back from him soon. Jamie Nelson aboard the Truman carrier.
Now, many Americans are overseas with the military not to fight, but to translate. That is to say, bridging the language barrier between our soldiers and the Iraqis. More now on that from Maya Zumwalt, who's with the 82nd Airborne.
I'm with a young woman named Jasmine El-Gamal. She is fresh out of college and found out that the military needed linguists that were fluent in Arabic to come over to Iraq, and that is exactly what she has done. She is with the 82nd Airborne Division, and she joins me now. Jasmine, you have essentially been going door to door with combat troops in this town of Samawah. Talk us through what you've been doing.
I go in with the infantry that's going to the towns. We knock door to door and we go in, and it's my job to go in and explain to the people what's going on so that they don't get scared, explain to them that we're here to help and try to find out what they need, food, water, what they're scared of, any concerns that they have, they say to me, and then I try to tell that back to the people that I'm working with.
I saw you at a humanitarian food drop inside the town. Local people here were swarming around you, trying to communicate through you to U.S. troops here. What were they asking you to tell them?
Yeah, they're really happy when they find out that someone speaks their language. Basically, they try to tell me what the most important things they need are, which is electricity and water, since a lot of that has been cut off since before we came here, and telling us how happy they are that we're here and offering to give us help if we need any help rebuilding the city.
You're putting yourself in a very dangerous situation. Why do you do this? You're right out of college.
I just want to be in the middle of everything. I want to be where the action is. I want to help people if I can. I'm in a position to help them, and so that's what I'm trying to do.
Well, I've seen you firsthand, and you're doing a great job. Thanks for joining us. Traveling with the 82nd Airborne Division in Samawah, Iraq, Maya Zumwalt, Fox News.
Taking control of Saddam's capital of Baghdad, what will it take to finish the job? Coming up, some insight from a veteran of the Gulf War.
And the hunt for weapons of mass destruction not turning up much yet. Does public opinion of the war hang in the balance? We're live in Washington with the latest.
If you've been investing in money funds, you've probably noticed your yields have slowed to a trickle. The Strong Ultra Short-Term Income Fund offers higher return potential and a 14-year history of proven performance. For an alternative to today's low yields, call 1-888-4STRONG. That's 1-888-4STRONG. We'll help you build a strong portfolio.
Wish your dentures were this comfortable? Bob's denture adhesive is Seabond.
Bought it for hold, love it for comfort.
Only Seabond clings wall to wall with 3 strong adhesives in a thin velvet soft wafer. No gaps, no ooze. Seabond, buy it for hold.
Love it for comfort.
Sick of messy denture baths? The Seabond bath has a special handle that locks on for easy cleaning with no messy spills.
Tomorrow, the conflict in Iraq. Get live updates on overnight military maneuvers, plus the latest developments from our nation's capital. Fox and Friends, real journalism, fair and balanced.
Hi, I'm Serena Butler from Georgia. I'm on USS Harriet Truman, and you're watching Fox News.
Everyone, I'm Rebecca Gomez with the latest developments on coalition forces fighting in Operation Iraqi Freedom. U.S. troops land a C-130 transport plane at the former Saddam International Airport for the first time since the war began. A Central Command spokesman confirming the cargo and transport plane landed, but he did not want to give specific details, citing operational security. It landed at the newly renamed Baghdad International Airport at about 8 p.m. Iraqi time. They are 8 hours ahead of us, so that would have been around noon East Coast time. U.S. forces capturing the airport a few days ago, but they continue to face pockets of Iraqi fighters. But as this C-130 landing shows us, the U.S. troops have secured key parts of that airport, including a runway. There are reports of frequent explosions, intense artillery, and heavy machine gun fire in the streets of the Iraqi capital. And southeast of the city, Marines are in a battle for control of a key bridge over the Tigris River. The Defense Department announcing a new phase in the air campaign, calling it Urban Close Air Support, keeping Allied planes flying over Baghdad at nearly all times. U.S. military officials have also released a body count from that incursion into the heart of Baghdad yesterday by the 3rd Infantry. Up to 3,000 Iraqi fighters were killed. Far south of the capital now in Basra, British troops setting up checkpoints in Iraq's second largest city for the first time since the war began. Until now, the 7th Armored Brigade, known as the Desert Rats, had only been on the outskirts there. But the British government warns that the battle for Basra is far from over. Allied troops have positively identified the body of Iraqi General Ali Hassan al-Majid's bodyguard. They are now going through the rubble of Chemical Ali's bombed-out home to see if his remains are in there. The general, known as Chemical Ali because he ordered a poison gas attack that killed thousands of Kurds in 1988. He is Saddam Hussein's cousin. And that's the very latest on coalition forces fighting in Operation Iraqi Freedom. Stick with Fox. We will keep you up to date on Allied troops. I'm Rebecca Gomez in Fox Central.
Allied forces searching for evidence that Iraq is hiding weapons of mass destruction. What if those weapons are never found? Correspondent Julie Kurtz is live in Washington with more on that. Julie?
Hi there. Well, the leader of the regime is at large, and so are his chemicals of mass destruction. U.S. military officials said today that so far in this war, they have not found evidence of those weapons of mass destruction, rather. Marines are investigating a suspected weapons of mass destruction site from the 1991 Gulf War today. No word yet on what they found in a nighttime raid along the Tigris River in the town of Salman Pak. Now, on Friday in western Iraq, Special Forces discovered bottles of tabun, a chemical agent used in the 1940s, but Central Command said the site was a training school and not an operational facility. Also closer to Baghdad, coalition forces came across manuals in Arabic describing chemical warfare and vials of a nerve agent antidote, but additional thousands of vials of white powder turned out to be the ingredient for explosives. Now today, Deputy Defense Secretary Paul Wolfowitz told Fox News that the Iraqi people will likely be the ones to lead the U.S. to these weapon sites once they are no longer fearful of Saddam Hussein.
And in fact, bear in mind, we've said all along, the key to finding these things is to get the people who know about it in circumstances where they're no longer fearful and intimidated, and let them tell us. And we aren't yet at that point. In fact, most of those people are probably collected in places where they're intimidated and terrorized.
According to the latest polls, a majority of Americans aren't bothered by the fact that no hard evidence has turned up on weapons of mass destruction. This week's Los Angeles Times poll found more than 75% of Americans, including 2/3 of liberals, now say they support the decision to go to war. And the main point here, more than 80% say they will still back the military action even if coalition forces don't find evidence of weapons of mass destruction. So the latest word from military officials, Greg, they still haven't found those weapons. Of course, they're still looking. And as the U.S. forces and U.K. forces take over more territory in Iraq, they say that it's less likely that those weapons will be used. But so far, no hard evidence of those weapons. Back to you.
Washington Post also, Julie, had pretty much the same kinds of numbers the LA Times found. So interesting to hear how Americans view this. Julie Kurtz in Washington, thanks.
British forces have staged their largest incursion thus far into Basra in the south. That's Iraq's second largest city, getting closer by the minute to the actual center of the city. Fox's David Lee Miller has all the details from Central Command headquarters in Qatar.
For the first time since the war got underway, British forces have now set up checkpoints inside Iraq's second largest city of Basra. British troops have been on that city's outskirts for the last couple of weeks, but today they pushed forward, meeting only limited resistance. At last word, some 40 armored personnel carriers were now on their way to the city's center. The advance on Baghdad today also continued. U.S. forces seized 2 major highways that lead in and out of the capital. CENTCOM says approximately 2,000 Iraqis have been killed since the assault on the city got underway. Iraqi resistance in and around Baghdad is described as dwindling and coming from a number of different units. In the meantime, coalition forces are taking more ground near the airport, but they also remain on the lookout, they say, for what might be booby traps. There have also been signs of limited Iraqi resistance, we are told, in an area northwest of the facility. And in another development, Iraq's information minister, Sahaf, describes as, in his word, an illusion. Coalition reports that the man nicknamed Chemical Ali may have been killed. His real name, Ali Hassan al-Majid, is Saddam's cousin, and he is accused of chemical attacks against the Kurds. CENTCOM says Chemical Ali's home has been hit by airstrikes. The remains of his bodyguard have been identified, but still there is no official word on the fate of Chemical Ali himself.
I'm not going to characterize what his status is at this point. I don't think we know for sure. I know that we certainly knew that he was our target, and we know that we feel comfortable that his bodyguard is now dead. As to Chemical Ali himself, I think time will tell.
And lastly now, CENTCOM, according to initial reports, says none of its forces were operating in the area where a Russian diplomatic convoy came under attack while leaving Baghdad and heading for Syria. According to a spokesman for the Russian president, several people were wounded in that incident. U.S. officials are saying that it happened in an area that is under control of the Iraqi regime. At CENTCOM in Doha, David Lee Miller, Fox News.
Coalition troops are in Baghdad, and they reportedly have the outer line areas pretty much covered now. So what will it take to gain control of the Iraqi capital? Brad Baker is a former Army Ranger and a Gulf War veteran. He joins us from Atlanta. Brad, good to see you. It appears that American forces have it covered, north, south, east, west. I think only Highway 2 hasn't been captured, and that'll happen shortly. As coalition troops close in, what happens?
Well, I think that a few things happen. Number one is right now, you don't know what a tremendous psychological and logistic effect it is on the troops to be able to land a C-130 on the airport in Baghdad. This is just unbelievable for the troops right now, because they now know that at any moment's time they can get supplies, troops, equipment, anything that they want into that airport, and that's only 9 miles away. Being a paratrooper during the first Gulf War, knowing that help was just that far away is a tremendous psychological factor. And it's a great logistical aid.
Indeed it is, and we cannot overestimate that. Special ops, what would they be doing as we encircle and close in?
Right. I think what we're going to see now is some of the same things we've seen at nighttime. Special ops are going to continue to conduct their missions, looking for specific targets and targets of opportunity, calling in airstrike, laser guided, and also sending back some information as to some troop movements and some troop strengths. I think that they're going to continue on as they have been. I think during the day you're going to see ground troops start to move a little bit closer in altogether. So you're, in effect, you're tightening the noose.
All right, let me ask you a little bit more about what the ground troops are going to do. And let me throw into the mix here a quote from a reporter on the ground who observed what the enemy is doing. We'll put it up on the screen. Here it is. Soldiers of the elite Republican Guard hunkered down for urban warfare. Armed with Kalashnikovs and mortars, they dug fresh trenches and fortified old ones. Some took over houses close to the city's southern approaches. You know, Brad, there's been a lot written about how dangerous urban warfare is. What advantages do our forces have, and how do they physically go after some of those entrenched paramilitary troops?
Right. Well, the first thing is, remember, we've made a lot of to-do about we really don't want to go in and do urban warfare, and we really don't want to have to go in and kick in doors. But the Iraqi regime better not be fooled. Just because we don't want to doesn't mean that we won't, and it doesn't mean that we're not trained. And what you're going to see now is you're going to see, as we're bringing in supplies and we're bringing in more troops, we're going to start sectoring off certain areas, and we're going to start clearing those areas. And if they're dug in and they're you know, have mortars and everything, that's expected. We expected them to do that. We trained for that. We're coming in, we're going to take sectors, we're going to pound sectors, we're going to have close air urban support, we're going to have special ops in identifying targets. I mean, they don't understand that just because we don't want to go doesn't mean that we're not ready to go. We've also seen a lot of thunder runs, we're calling them right now, where we're just basically at will going down highways, taking targets of opportunity and then turning around and coming right back. You're going to see a lot more of that, I believe, Brad, as the ground war goes.
There seems to be renewed optimism that this war may, thankfully, be over soon. Here's a quote that I plucked from today's Daily News, which was a bit provocative, if not inflammatory in some ways. As one measure of the new sense of optimism around the White House and Pentagon, a well-placed administration official jokingly predicted you'll be able to go to the McDonald's in Baghdad by June. Well, good taste or bad taste, all joking aside, are we closer, Brad, to the end of this war than we are to the beginning of it?
That's a tough question. I think that there's a lot more that needs to play out. Once we go in and we gain control, which everybody's hoping is in the next few days, there's going to be a lot of pockets of resistance that you're going to need to flush out. There's a lot of work that we need to do with the civilians to build up that trust and to get them to assist us to flush out some of these resistance. And then you need to put in power, a government, and those are things way above my head as being just a sergeant. Well, but I think that there's a lot more that needs to be done, but we have done some great things in a short period of time.
As you're talking here, we're watching one of Saddam Hussein's statues to himself, which is being literally toppled there. But that landmark, if you can call it that, aside, our coalition forces have been very, very careful to minimize civilian Iraqi casualties, not to hit any mosques, to try to avoid schools and other landmarks and important infrastructures in Baghdad and other cities. True?
Very true. I will almost guarantee you that in every op order, there's been an extra paragraph added. An op order is an operational order before you go out and conduct a mission. And that extra paragraph has been civilian targets and civilian establishments. And the coalition forces are going out of their way, sometimes putting themselves in extremely elevated danger to not have civilian casualties or to not destroy civilian structures. And the world has to just be in awe of this, because I'm telling you what, I don't know if I would have had that type of patience back when I was in. And these kids who are over there now, these men and women, they have some patience because they're really using their head right now to go out of their way and not have civilian casualties. Even though we've had some, they've been very low in numbers compared to what they could have been without a well-trained military in there.
Patience aside, you served in the Gulf War. How do you compare that war to this one in terms of logistics, operations, weaponry, so forth?
Well, I think that obviously technical, they're way ahead on this war. On our war, or the first Gulf War, we sat back and we let the Air Force and the Navy missiles and everybody just bombed them for months, and then we came in. On this one, it was moving in together, and I mean, this was a well-orchestrated movement here, because you had air and ground moving at the same time. You had coalition forces moving. In our war, in the first war, they just had bombing and then we would come in. Special operations, coming from the north. This war has been much more complicated, but I think that these soldiers were well trained, better prepared. Not that we weren't prepared, but they were a little better prepared. And they've come in and just done one incredible job.
Well, it's amazing. We forget that in '91, there was no such thing as these satellite-guided GPS JDAMs. 80% of the arsenal is the JDAMs. They didn't even have the B-2 bomber ready back then. So huge differences. Brad Baker, former Army Ranger, a Gulf War veteran, thank you for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
Sure. Lori?
Well, we are about at the end of our 2-hour stint up here.
It has gone by quickly. A lot has happened, especially in the most important thing we've been trying to underscore. Not only have we taken the airport just outside of Baghdad, but now our own C-130 transport planes, at least one of them, has landed, a huge boost to the war.
Right, and so right now we've got the transport planes landing, but pretty soon they're going to be bringing in the fighter aircraft, which is going to just make this very quick work, I think, in the next couple of days.
So the news tightens.
Yes.
And that does it for us. I'm Greg Jarrett.
And I'm Lori Dew. Thanks a lot for joining us this afternoon. Paige Hopkins and Bob Sellers are taking over the reins next.
That's right. The outcome certain, Baghdad's fall, victory unconditional. But where is the dictator, and how do we get Saddam and his inner circle?
And, well, you're looking live at Baghdad. Stay with Team Fox coverage. Bob and Paige are coming up next.
Stand by for transmission. They'll check in, okay?
10-4, going in.
We are at war. Very difficult situation for the people.
As we are now embedded with the U.S. military.
A long convoy of Marines is
as coalition forces prepare to advance.
What can a Tyrannosaurus Rex teach us about a retirement plan? What's big one day may disappear the next. At Wachovia Securities, we learn from the world around us and provide financial advice for those who need to rebuild. Together, we can achieve uncommon results. Wachovia Securities.
tomorrow, a Saddam sighting. Has the bombing of Baghdad driven him out of hiding? Was this strategic appearance a desperate last-ditch effort to rally support as coalition forces close in on his capital? Plus, the Bush and Blair meeting in Northern Ireland. Live reports and reaction. At 5, it's the big story. Then at 6, watch Special Report. At 7, it's the Fox Report.
Fox News Live as coalition troops blast through roadblocks to begin the liberation of Baghdad.
I'm Heather Nauert in Amman, Jordan. A new kind of war is being waged in Baghdad. I'll have the details coming up.
British troops storm towards the center of Basra, meeting little resistance in what appears to be a final assault on Iraq's second city. I'm Jonathan Hunt in Kuwait. I'll have that story coming up.
A case of friendly fire in northern Iraq. I'm Kelly Wright at the Pentagon. I'll have that story.
And the parents of Private Jessica Lynch today see their daughter face-to-face for the first time since she was freed from the Iraqis. That story on Fox News Live right now. And good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bob Sellers here with Paige Hopkins, and a lot to talk about today, a lot of accomplishments. And one of the things Jonathan Hunt pointed out is that those efforts into Basra, very interesting to me because we talked to him earlier today, and he said a lot of people in Baghdad may be waiting to see what happens in Basra, how that turns out, to see if it's really safe to come out, if it's really safe now.
If as Basra goes, so will go Baghdad.
Perhaps
also, we
so.
had that C-130 land at the Baghdad airport. We do have control of the Baghdad airport. Very exciting developments today. And coalition forces making substantial gains in their bid to control Baghdad. Heather Nauert is live in Amman, Jordan with more. Heather.
Hi there, Paige. Iraq launching missiles at the Baghdad airport today. That's according to some reports, which is tantamount to the Iraqi regime admitting the coalition forces are indeed at the airport. Yesterday, they were saying troops aren't even close. But troops are indeed at the airport today, as they were yesterday, and it's still the center of a lot of activity. The airport is an important asset, of course, because it could be used as a staging ground for coalition forces, although they're still working to fully secure it. Now, yesterday, we reported that forces were clearing the runway, hoping to quickly bring in supplies and aid. And as you mentioned earlier, today, the first military aircraft plane came in, and a C-130 transport plane coming into the airport today. Now, the Army and Marines are continuing to move into Baghdad to secure the entrances around the city, and to help them on the ground, air support is protecting them overhead. They call it urban close air support, and with it, troops can call in ordnance to strike pockets of opposition 24 hours a day. Now, even though this helps, military commanders are still concerned that tough urban warfare may lie ahead. Now, it's midnight in Baghdad right now, and machine gun fire is raging through central parts of the city, and surface-to-air rockets are also being used, but no word yet on who is doing the firing. And earlier today, the streets were calling with Fedayeen fighters and teenagers armed with guns, but tonight the streets are deserted. And U.S. military commanders saying that basically the Iraqi military regime no longer exists as a fighting force. Perhaps that's why earlier today the Iraqi foreign minister coming out and saying to fighters there that if you can't find your own troops, join up with another. That's the latest from Amman, Jordan. Back to you in New York.
Thanks, Heather.
Fox News has learned coalition forces have picked up a key piece of real estate. Correspondent Chris Klein joins us live from an undisclosed location in northern Iraq. Chris.
Yes, indeed, Bob. We're speaking to you from a piece of northern Iraqi territory that only a few hours ago, in daylight hours, was still in the possession of the Iraqi army. We've temporarily attached ourselves to a small elite team of allied special forces comprising U.S. Army Green Berets and United States Air Force combat controllers, a team that has played a really instrumental role in guiding aerial ordnance onto their targets, onto the Iraqi enemy, which not long ago vacated these premises. In shorthand, what took place in the early hours today, not long after dawn, was a concerted air-ground effort, which saw these very same forward air control, combat control teams guiding Allied airstrikes on these positions here, while simultaneously supported by mortar fire, some 1,900 Peshmerga, or local Kurdish forces, Kurdish guerrillas, light infantry essentially, stormed this location. Now, while we cannot reveal to you where it is precisely because of operational security, we can say, suffice it to say, that it is a strategic point in the Allied line of advance in the north. Also, quite remarkably, Kurdish forces here suffered only one KIA in the course of this stiff battle today. No casualties amongst the Allied contingent here as well, and really only a score of wounded amongst the Kurds, most of them light wounds, nothing terribly serious save for one or two. To the west, we continue to hear sporadically throughout the night the roar of Allied aircraft overhead as Allied fighter aircraft, carrier-borne aircraft, and B-52 bombers continue to smash heavy armored, Iraqi armored units and artillery positions only about some 10 kilometers to the west. We can expect to see more of this in the next 24 hours, and we can very likely in the course of perhaps the next 2 to 3 days see a further Allied and Kurdish joint advance from the position where we are. From this current vantage point, we can clearly see Iraqi positions, but they have been quiet for some time, clearly cowed by the takeover of this position today, and indeed they've been meted out a terrible punishment by Allied air power. Bob.
Chris, let me ask you this. As we showed initially, we can't really see you because you're undisclosed and I think observing kind of blackout conditions there. Tell us why that is in effect and how this fighting might differ from what you saw over the past couple of weeks.
Well, first of all, we're observing light discipline for the classic reason of not drawing enemy fire. This is as forward a position as one would hope to find on the Allied northern front. As I say, the enemy is very nearby. We're easily within mortar and artillery range, perhaps even heavy machine gun range. So we can be reached, so it's lights out. Now, the difference perhaps to the more conventional effort, however unconventional this campaign has turned out to be from the outset in the south, here perhaps conditions are more akin to the fighting that we witnessed in Afghanistan, where elite small special forces teams backed by Allied air power and primarily local forces are bringing battle to the enemy, and these forward air control, combat control teams here and the air power that they bring to bear with such tremendous precision most of the time, really a substitute for the lack of heavy weaponry that the local Kurdish forces have. Bob.
Yeah, Chris, interesting that you compare it to Afghanistan since they used the Northern Alliance there, using the Kurds here. So it wasn't just the shock and awe that was on Baghdad, but a different kind of strategy up there. Thanks a lot, Chris Klump.
And Fox News is everywhere for Operation Iraqi Freedom, from the battlefield to the relief efforts. Fox's Adam Housley just joined the Royal Fleet Auxiliary ship, Sir Percival. He joins us now on the video phone. Adam, how's it going?
Well, we're in Gulf. We can't obviously give you our exact location because this ship is not an offensive ship by any stretch. As you mentioned, it's a merchant ship that's helping the Royal Marines and the Royal Navy. It's been a part of actions before, back in 1982, the Falkland Island War, and in Gulf War I as well. It left port from England back in January, arrived here the end of February with 200 Royal Commandos that were part of the force used to secure the Al Faw Peninsula. It then did a couple other minor operations in this region. Now it picked up a massive humanitarian load, 250 tons of rice, as well as a water purification system, also some tea on board, all meant for Qasr and Southern Iraq. But of course, that can't be taking place until we know it's a secure trip up north. There's only been one ship thus far that's gone up the river into Qasr to bring humanitarian aid in. This would be the second one, and we will make that trip at some point in the next few days. We know when we're going, but we can't tell you, obviously, again, for security reasons. On board right now, we do have about 60 or 70 sailors that are taking part in this. When we get there, of course, there's also Marines on the to help us facilitate getting the rice off and getting it to the population. We've seen some of the pictures in recent days, of course. Very important to get this in. In fact, we had a chance to talk to the Commodore of the British fleet here tonight on board. He came aboard our ship for a few hours, And he made a very clear distinction about how this is a two-front war. There's also the war that's going on in the north, the Baghdad and Basra, and we've heard all the different battles that have taken place in recent days, but also a PR war, a humanitarian war to make sure that people in this region know that they're coming in peace, meaning that the British and the American forces that are in their country are here in peace with all this rice, as well as the water purification system, as we talked about, as well as the tea. Paige?
Adam, thank you so much. Stay safe.
Well, coalition troops are reaching Baghdad, of course, a symbol of Saddam losing power, you could say, but across Iraq, and especially in the south, as we see literally teetering. It's even easier to see him on the edge, teetering there. Jonathan Hunt is live in Kuwait City with more on the coalition battle for Basra. Jonathan, what can you tell us?
Hi, Bob. Yeah, after a 2-week standoff, British troops finally made a major move today, storming towards the center of Basra. Columns of tanks rolling past limited Iraqi resistance in what appears to be the beginning of a final assault on Iraq City. The 7th Armored Brigade, the famed Desert Rats, led the charge and reported no heavy fighting as they moved into the city. The troops have reportedly seized the Ba'ath Party headquarters, and overall progress has been good, according to British officials, although they cautioned that the battle is far from over. Having said that, some Iraqis appear to think it is over. A large crowd greeting British troops as they swept in, cheering and waving, clearly pleased to see coalition forces on the streets of downtown Basra. Convincing the local population that Saddam Hussein's reign really is over is, of course, seen by the coalition as a vital part of building confidence among the Iraqi people, perhaps having a knock-on effect to what happens in Baghdad. In nearby Zubair, meantime, the investigation continues into that gruesome discovery of hundreds of coffins containing human body parts and bones. Now, coalition officials on the ground in Zubair today told Fox News correspondent Steve Sentani that they are increasingly sure that the remains are those of Iraqi soldiers and some Iranians killed during the Iran-Iraq war back in 1980. Now, U.S. officials who will help to oversee Iraq's transition to peace and a new government are now here in Kuwait, waiting to move into Iraq once the shooting stops. They will be concentrating on humanitarian aid, reconstruction and civil administration. The U.S. wants to hand power to an Iraqi government, to the people of Iraq, as soon as it is practical. But that may take some time, and Iraqi opposition members are already warning that before the US does anything, it must first remove all elements of the current government.
I wish that the US we don't think it's just Saddam Hussein. There is a regime that supports them, just like Hitler. So without destroying the entire regime, there would still be complications.
There is as yet no specific timetable for the establishment of a new Iraqi government, nor is there an obvious choice to lead the country into its new era. That's the latest live from Kuwait City. Bob and Paige, back to you guys.
Jonathan Hunt, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rebecca Gomez with an overview of troop movements in Operation Iraqi Freedom. For the first time since the war started, American pilots have landed a C-130 transport plane at the former Saddam International Airport. A Central Command spokesman did not want to give specific details, citing operational security, but the giant cargo and transport plane touched down at the newly renamed Baghdad International Airport at about 8 o'clock in the evening Iraqi time. They are 8 hours ahead of us, so that would have been around noon Eastern time. U.S. forces captured that airport a few days ago, but they continue to face pockets of Iraqi fighters. But as the landing shows, U.S. troops have secured key parts of the airport, including a runway. More reports of explosions, intense artillery, and heavy firefighting in the streets of the Iraqi capital. Southeast of the city, Marines are in a battle for control of a key bridge over the Tigris River. They've been going at it all day there. And the Defense Department has announced a new phase in the air campaign, which will keep Allied planes flying over Baghdad at nearly all times. U.S. military officials giving now a body count from that incursion into the center of Baghdad by the 3rd Infantry. Up to 3,000 Iraqi fighters, we are told, were killed. In Basra, British troops have set up checkpoints in Iraq's second largest city for the first time since the conflict broke out. The troops had only been on the outskirts of the southern city before today. Allied troops have positively identified the body of Iraqi General Ali Hassan al-Majid's bodyguard. They are now going through the rubble of Chemical Ali's bombed-out home to see if his remains are there. The general, nicknamed Chemical Ali because he ordered a deadly chemical attack on Kurds in 1988. He is Saddam Hussein's cousin. And that's an overall look at troop progress today in Operation Iraqi Freedom. Stick with Fox. We will keep you up to date on Allied forces. I'm Rebecca Gomez in Fox Central.
A lot of action going on in Baghdad, of course. We've seen troops march through the city, out to the airport. They have control of the city. Also, what's been going on is we take a live shot of that right now. Sporadic anti-aircraft fire is suggesting, of course, that there's some aircraft activity going. Chris Yumpelt joins us now, reporter live from Baghdad. Chris, what's going on?
Yes, good evening. The power blackout is still on for the most part in the city center. There are some lights on the outskirts. That may or may not mean that there are troop movements on the Iraqi side planned for the center of the city for tonight. This is only something I can presume when there's a blackout which changes its pattern every night. That's what leads me to believe that. Other than that, as you just said, there's sporadic anti-aircraft fire, although there is a lot of airplanes circling over the city and dropping their loads on the outskirts. So I suggest that maybe a number of these anti-aircraft positions are now being used along the front lines, not to shoot into the air any longer, but maybe more in a horizontal pattern, because they may be running out of the appropriate weapons to defend the city borders.
Chris, give me a feel for the difference in Baghdad. You've been there for a couple weeks, and obviously now with Allied troops in charge of the airport, having gone through the city, making some incursions into Baghdad, what are your observations about how that city is changing?
There's definitely a mounting tension here. As you have also reported in the past, there are numbers of Iraqis, Baghdadi citizens, packing their bags and leaving the city. Most informally, the ones in the suburbs, but also out of the center boroughs of Baghdad. More and more people are trying to get out of here. In fact, there have been some restrictions now being put up by the government, which is also a new step. There was so far no official curfew, but as of today, there is a 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. curfew as far as the traveling in between cities is concerned. This does not mean that you can't leave your house when you live in Baghdad, for instance, but you can't leave town until the next morning.
So when we see some of those, what look like cars out, those people are not violating any kind of curfew and their lives are not at risk?
Well, that's a two-tier question, and part one, I would say affirmative. They're not violating any current laws or regulations here, but as far as part B of the question is concerned, I would think anybody driving around Baghdad tonight is risking his or her life, by all means.
Yeah. What have you seen about the attitude of the Iraqi people? And I guess we also always have to keep in mind that you have a minder with you at all times, but from what you've been able to garner, what's your feel about what's going on now for the average civilian in Iraq?
Well, for the most part, people believe that the government is still absolutely in power. They get very much colored reports about what is happening along the front lines and who's losing more tanks and more other weapons and more people, obviously. And then you have regular appearances by the president or people who look like him, at least on television. And you also have, which is the latest rumor in town, cab drivers and hairdressers, for instance, talking among themselves and to their customers about the rumor that Saddam Hussein, along with one of his sons, has actually been involved in the airport battle, in the front lines.
Well, that's interesting. That would sound as good as what the information minister there puts out, that the American forces go into the airport and take video and then leave, and that the Iraqis have full control. How many televisions are still operating? Because I always wonder who that so-called information minister is playing to. And obviously a lot of people in the Arab world, but are the people in Baghdad seeing those reports?
Well, for the most part, they're not, because there's a limited number of people who actually have a generator here, and can constantly supply their homes with power to actually receive television. Although some the sales of car batteries have gone up dramatically, and so that the prices for those, of course. So people are definitely trying to get some sort of electronics device going to get information. For the most part, it is the radio. This is the state-run Iraqi radio station, along with other Arabic news casts and so forth from other Arab countries. This information is being a little more in depth, I guess, reported a little more in depth by other Arab nations. But for the Iraqi radio station, I would think the straight rhetoric from the information ministry goes out to the people.
Very interesting. Christian Umpelt joining us from Baghdad. And be careful. We appreciate your reports.
And the 3rd Infantry troops making their presence felt in Baghdad. This is coalition forces, of course, maintain a virtual chokehold on that city. Let's bring in retired U.S. General Paul Vallely. He joins us now from Washington. Welcome, General. We are tightening.
Hello, Paige. How are you today?
I am good. I want to find out what you think of how our coalition forces are doing right now. We're tightening our chokehold on Baghdad. Give us a sense of how far we are in terms of taking over Baghdad right now.
Paige, I'd be happy to. Now, understand, we are now going into day 18. This is the 3rd quarter, as I look at it, of a 30-day campaign, which started a little over 2 weeks ago. But the entire operational area, Paige, to include Baghdad here, very busy, many activities going on with the maneuver forces, as well as up in the air, and also with our special operating forces here. Let's go to the screenwriter now, and let me discuss some of the things happening in the Baghdad area. As reported, the first C-130 has come in here and landed at the Baghdad International Airport. Now, remember, some of those runways, at least one of them was cratered, another one had mounds of dirt put up. So we've had, evidently, the engineers come in there and fix that particular area so that now we can bring in these transport aircrafts. After the C-130s, then probably the C-17s, and maybe at some point in time in a few weeks, the big C-5As. But our forces now are concentrating on various targets, putting pressure on Baghdad from all directions. Now, we also have forces that are along the routes going in and out of Baghdad, and what they're doing are checking all of the traffic going in and out of Baghdad. So the pressure is all around Baghdad, and the Special Operations Forces, we haven't heard yet, all of the targets they will be looking at, particularly regime targets, and Saddam Hussein, if he is still alive, and his top echelons.
General,
more will evolve in the next day on that.
Did you just hear our
Back to you, Paige.
Did you just hear, General, our reporter was saying there was a rumor that Saddam and his son were actually at Baghdad Airport on the front lines attacking coalition forces. Does that sound preposterous?
Well, I did. Well, I did hear that, but I would suggest that's probably not the case. Good propaganda as usual that they're putting out. But they're basically living in some kind of a mode over there, either down in a bunker, they don't see what's going on. But I think this thing's about to implode from the inside, Paige, here within the next 48 hours.
Okay, I want to ask you, because it's about after 1 a.m. right now in Baghdad. We just saw pictures from the streets. It almost looked like some anti-aircraft weapons were being ignited. What is going on right now? Are people bunkered down? Is this the end game?
It is the end game, and what you see are the last remnants of the Ba'ath Party devotees to Saddam Hussein, as well as other remnants of some of these fractured Special Republican Guard units, and perhaps even the Special Security Organization, which was headed up by his son, Qusay. Now, we know we've shattered the command and control The unit's ability to communicate has very much been fragmented. And so these individual groups now perhaps acting alone without a lot of guidance. But they're there still fighting. That's why it's so intense. So these targets will be selected and taken out by air and by ground forces over the next 48 hours to completely debathitize Baghdad. And of course, we have a lot of activity down in Basra, which we'll cover later on.
Okay, General Vallely, General Paul Vallely, thank you so much. And we're going to speak with you a little later in the hour.
I like that.
That's right.
Debathitize. We have a new term, debathitize. Of course, the Ba'ath Party. All right. U.S. military brass say that coalition forces have total control over the airspace over Iraq now. We've seen that that point was proven just a few hours ago with that C-130 that went into what is now being called Baghdad International Airport. Correspondent Kelly Wright is live from the Pentagon with the latest. Kelly.
Hey, Bob, you know, you've got to like that. The general saying debathitize. That's really a new statement for all of us. And, of course, he's indeed very right, because the senior defense officials here at the Pentagon do tell us that the Air Force has conducted some 1,850 sorties alone today. More are anticipated throughout the night as coalition ground forces continue to make their move deeper into the heart of Baghdad. Now, today there were also some visible signs, more visible signs, that Allied forces have indeed taken control of Baghdad International Airport. Let me show you why. Central Command says a C-130 aircraft landed at Baghdad's International Airport, the first known U.S. aircraft to arrive in the Iraqi capital. You heard the general talking about the rough terrain on that landing strip. The C-130 is capable of landing on rough terrain. The C-130 aircraft is the primary transport for airdropping troops and equipment into hostile areas, although CENTCOM is kind of quiet and tight-lipped about what the operation will unfold there. On the ground in Baghdad, meantime, U.S. soldiers of the 101st Airborne Division engaged in a fierce firefight Sunday with Iraqi forces at the airport. CENTCOM says no U.S. forces were hurt, but 2 Iraqis were killed, and the attack began when up to a dozen people came running out of buildings near the facility's 13-square-mile perimeter.
We know that there are still some formations that are out there. There are still parts of the Republican Guard Forces Command, the Al-Nida Division particularly, parts of the Hammurabi Division, the Adnan Division, still in the north. We'll still fight them unless they choose to surrender. Some of them may have moved toward Baghdad, but we've not seen any big movements into Baghdad. Certainly not since the call for everyone to come rushing to Baghdad, or the call for everyone to rush from Baghdad out to Baghdad Airport.
In northern Iraq, where the Green Beret and Air Force Special Forces, along with Kurdish troops, have been making their advance, an incident of friendly fire taking place. A U.S. warplane bomb Allied Special Forces there. In-bed reports indicate at least 18 were killed and 45 wounded. Now, those reports currently conflict with the official report from Central Command. CENTCOM says coalition aircraft were conducting close air support missions at the time and were in coordination with civilian or with ground forces. CENTCOM says early casualty reports indicate 1 civilian may have been killed, 1 U.S. soldier injured, and 1 Kurdish soldier and 4 civilians also injured. There are also reports that a Russian convoy carrying delegates, a diplomatic convoy that is, was leaving Baghdad and came under some fire, and there are also reports that some of those Russian delegates may have been injured. Now, CENTCOM says this happened in an Iraqi-controlled area, so it's quite unlikely that it was any type of fire from Allied forces. Back to you.
All right, Kelly. Thank you very much, Kelly Wright. Day 2 of the U.S. troops rolling into Baghdad. They've engaged the enemy, and it has not gone well for the Iraqis. We have a live report coming up.
In a world of computer confusion, 3 young interns will soon learn there's one place with all the answers. A place where you can get a PC made just for you at a price that's right for you. A place where computer confusion has met its match.
Thanks for calling Dell. What can I build for you today?
Get ready. Dell presents The Interns.
So, what do you think of my movie?
Well, that's one way to make an intern training video.
Now you can get a Dimension desktop with an Intel Pentium 4 processor for just $5.99 after mail-in rebate. And right now, for a limited time, you'll get free shipping. Visit our website for even more great offers. And check out our notebooks, too. You're not just getting a great deal, you're getting a Dell.
Darren, about my close-ups, there could be more of them.
Rated E for easy. Easy as Dell. Dell PCs use Intel Pentium 4 processors.
may not be as easy as pushing a button, but with e-file from the IRS, your taxes can be. It's the fastest, surest way to get your taxes behind you. So ask your tax preparer or visit us on the web.
President Bush back at the White House from Camp David. He will head to Northern Ireland tomorrow morning for a summit with British Prime Minister Tony Blair. A live report now from our White House correspondent, James Rosen. Hi, James.
Hi, Paige. Good afternoon from the White House as President Bush prepares to head to Northern Ireland tomorrow morning for the third face-to-face meeting with Prime Minister Blair that he's held in just over 3 weeks. The White House is struggling to find a way to bring to heel one of Iraq's troublemaking neighbors. The president arrived back from Camp David.
Saying that body count is not really a priority for them, number one. And number two, it's not an exact science, and it's not unusual to have varying estimates. And also, CENTCOM frequently will incorporate figures from airstrikes, the number of casualties that result from airstrikes during an operation, and ground commanders sometimes will not include those numbers in their estimates. That could account for the discrepancy. But overall, unit commanders are saying that this was a very successful mission for a couple of reasons. Number one, they cleared a major avenue of approach into Baghdad of all of its weapon systems. And number two, it was a reminder to the Iraqi regime and any remaining fighters in Baghdad that the U.S. military and coalition forces are not 100 miles away from Baghdad, but they are right at Baghdad's door, and they can enter the city at will.
Amazing stuff from our own Greg Kelly. Well, there's word Saddam Hussein's Republican Guard have stockpiled so much food that much of it is sitting unused at an air base and slowly rotting. This as thousands of Iraqis go hungry. The entire stockpile is believed to have come from the Oil for Food program. It contains flour, rice, lentils, and it could easily feed a small town. Meantime, British troops distributed water supplies to folks in a small village near Iraq's southern oil fields. The village is so small that it doesn't even appear on any map. Royal engineers discovered it while surveying a railway line near Qasr. Rail service to the area stopped 2 weeks ago, cutting off the 200 villagers from the outside world. And even in peacetime, Saddam Hussein's whereabouts are really top secret. And now that the Iraqi president is a target for the U.S. military, it's even harder to track him. An exiled dissident telling the Associated Press that only 2 people are kept posted on Saddam's actual whereabouts. They include his private secretary and his younger son, Qusay. Not even his other son, Uday, is in the loop. He's considered too unstable. And a new poll showing overwhelming support for the war effort. The Los Angeles Times reporting that 77% of Americans back Operation Iraqi Freedom, and 52% say the war to depose Saddam Hussein's regime will help stabilize the whole Middle East. The poll also finding President Bush's approval rating rising now to 68%. That is the highest level in an LA Times poll since last summer. And President Bush is back at the White House today, gearing up for a summit with British Prime Minister Tony Blair, set to take place tomorrow in Northern Ireland. A live report now from White House correspondent James Rosen, my pal there on the North Lawn. James.
Rita, thanks so much as President Bush prepares to head tomorrow to Northern Ireland to meet face-to-face for the third time in just the last 4 weeks with British Prime Minister Tony Blair. A key aide to President Bush is also overseas, working to smooth over diplomatic difficulties with another, newer, but no less important ally of the United States. The president got back today from Camp David here at the White House around mid-morning today. He spent his morning attending church services at Camp David and speaking by telephone with his national security advisor, Dr. Condoleezza Rice, who is today in Moscow. More on that in a moment. Now, tomorrow, the president will touch down in Belfast. In addition to reviewing the rapid progress of troops in Iraq, he and Prime Minister Tony Blair will discuss Iraq's post-war future. The visit will also highlight the relatively successful ceasefire in Northern Ireland as a model that the Israelis and Palestinians might follow. Meantime, Dr. Rice landed in Moscow today. Her visit comes as the U.S. has complained about Russian military sales to the Iraqi regime, and it coincides with reports a Russian diplomatic convoy came under fire.
Been taken from Saddam's regime. Now to the south, British troops have driven 40 tanks and armored vehicles into the center of Basra, Iraq's second largest city. They've set up a base in the center of town, but the battle for control there is not over yet. Back now to Baghdad. A giant C-130 transport plane has now arrived at Baghdad International Airport. This is the first American plane to land there since our troops took over. There are still sporadic gun battles on the airport's perimeter, and the death toll on this day. CENTCOM says a dozen Iraqi soldiers died today with no American casualties. Good evening, everyone. It's 4 a.m. in Baghdad now, 8 p.m. here in New York. I'm Linda Vester. Glad you're with us for our live coverage of Operation Iraqi Freedom. There are a number of new military developments this hour. Best way to do this is to start with the overview from the Pentagon. Kelly Wright is standing by with the latest. Kelly?
Linda, good evening to you. I can tell you that CENTCOM and the Pentagon continue to say that the coalition forces are making a progress that is defined as being remarkable and even superb. As we show you live video now of Baghdad, the Air Force and Navy have conducted at least 1,850 sorties over Baghdad. They're conducting a new phase in the air campaign. It's called Urban Close Air Support. They'll drop smaller bombs to prevent civilian casualties in an urban area of 5 million people. The airstrikes will continue to provide support for ground forces advancing on the city. Meantime, coalition forces continue to gain more control of Baghdad International Airport. A C-130 aircraft like this landed today at the airport. CENTCOM didn't comment on the specific mission of the flight, but the C-130 is typically used for transporting troops and equipment. Meantime, on the ground in Baghdad, U.S. soldiers engaged in a fierce firefight Sunday with Iraqi forces at the airport. CENTCOM says no U.S. forces were hurt, but 2 Iraqis were killed. The attack began when up to a dozen people came running out of buildings near the facility's 13-square-mile perimeter.
We know that there are still some formations that are out there. There are still parts of the Republican Guard Forces Command, the Al-Nida Division particularly, parts of the Hammurabi Division, the Adnan Division still in the north. We'll still fight them unless they choose to surrender. Some of them may have moved toward Baghdad, but we've not seen any big movements into Baghdad. Certainly not since the call for everyone to come rushing to Baghdad or the call for everyone to rush from Baghdad out to Baghdad Airport.
Now, in northern Iraq, where Special Operations Forces along with Kurdish troops have been making their advance, an incident of friendly fire. A U.S. warplane bombed Allied Special Operations and Kurdish ground forces there. Embed reports indicate at least 18 were killed and 45 wounded. Those reports currently conflict with the official report from Central Command. CENTCOM says coalition aircraft were conducting close air support missions at the time and were in coordination with ground forces. CENTCOM says early casualty reports indicate 1 civilian may have been killed, 1 U.S. soldier, 1 Kurdish soldier, and 4 civilians injured. And a convoy of Russian diplomats were also apparently engaged in some sort of firefight. They were the victims of a crossfire, according to one journalist. But CENTCOM says when those Russian convoys were actually leaving Baghdad to go to Syria, they came under fire from Iraqi troops. That coalition forces were nowhere in that vicinity. Back to you, Linda.
Kelly Wright, live at the Pentagon. Kelly, thank you very much. We want to go through these developments now with someone who really knows his way around warfighting, former Navy Secretary John Lehman. He's here with us in the studio. Welcome. It's nice to have you.
Good evening.
Let me first ask you about what's going on in Baghdad. You heard Kelly Wright reporting on the Urban Close Air Support.
Yes.
That we basically have people on the ground calling in coordinates and Navy and Air Force aircraft, strike aircraft, sort of standing by aloft. How does that work?
Well, they're in the phase now where they're taking advantage of our tremendous superiority in command and control and communications, and with the integration of all of the forces able to work together, they've trained together, their equipment works together. So the Air Force and the Navy are assigned sectors and boxes where they will send their fighters armed with very precision weapons for close air support, trained and equipped to communicate with the Anglicode teams and the forward air control teams on the ground, the special forces, and taking their time to be very precise in targeting as they move and close the ring around the city to really avoid civilian casualties, avoid friendly casualties, and to eliminate the pockets of resistance. And they have a range of weapons of precision with limited collateral damage,
right.
With area munitions and
right.
so forth, according to the target. So
now
that's what you're seeing now.
This perimeter, loose perimeter that we've now formed around Baghdad with the odd probing mission, probably more than we're being told right now. What is the point of that?
Well, the point is to allow as many people as can remove themselves from the city to do so.
You mean friendlies? Iraqi civilians?
Iraqi civilians, the innocents, and also the bad guys, to allow the psychological warfare teams to operate and to have some effect. They're still trying to get as many of the Iraqi army and Republican guards and special guards to defect, put down their guns, leave. They're distributing leaflets and radio transmissions and so forth, telling them how to do that, to give them time to sap the morale and to augment the crumbling of the resistance in the city itself. So it's understandable. There are many commentators that are kind of a little impatient, wishing that we get in there and get it over with, but that's not the way to do it.
If you had to guess how long it will take to clear the city, to have it under the kind of control we're looking for?
Well, I think it's going to take as many as a couple of more weeks. It may be measured in days, perhaps, but it's not going to end like tomorrow on a date, right? Certain. It's going to peter out as they eliminate the hardcore of the supporters of the Ba'ath Party, the trained terrorist groups. It's going to take a while to really secure the city, and they're going about it in exactly the right way. They're not trying to force it. They're trying to dismantle the resistance piece by piece using our superior technology.
Speaking of terrorist groups, it appears that we have now taken what was at least a terrorist training camp, a place called Salman Pak, which was infamous for years. Right. It looks like we have rounded up a number of third nationals, Jordanians, Syrians, Yemenis, a number of others. Considering that terrorism is your other specialty right now, what do you think that is going to yield?
Well, I think it's a very good lesson in what this war on terrorism is all about. It illustrates that Al-Qaeda is not this single hierarchical group. You should think of Al-Qaeda as more an archipelago of terrorist groups of different affiliations, but all communicating, all getting support, getting financial support, often augmented by Al-Qaeda, the Al-Qaeda organization, sometimes by other organizations, mutually cooperating. And that's what you're seeing in Salman Pak. This is Iraq has been a haven for a variety of groups. Hezbollah, Hamas, half a dozen other lesser-known groups that have been part of this terrorist archipelago. And so that was why Iraq was so essential to remove the regime that created this safe haven for the terrorist training and support and equipping and providing training in weapons of mass destruction. Salman Pak is a perfect example.
In fact, to our viewers, that was what you just saw on the screen, sort of post-strike, what's left of the Salman Pak facility. So in terms of documentation, you know, the goods that we have been looking for, WMD, anything else, you know, anything else that gives that smoking gun, sorry for the cliche, and everybody's used it, but of an Iraqi connection to terrorism. Do you think, for example, we're going to find paperwork in Salman Pak that says, aha, here it is?
Yes, I'm sure they'll turn up a lot of documentation, both on the training and equipping and weapons of mass destruction, the financial support from various sources. But in a way, it's really irrelevant. It's kind of been created partially, I guess, by the Congress and the administration that somehow we're going to find that cache. The reality is that this has been one of the main havens for the training and equipping of terrorist groups. The Hezbollah has moved back and forth from Iran with the cooperation of the Iranian Secret Service and the Iraqi Secret Service. They also, by the way, get a great deal of support in Europe. I mean, it's scandalous that Hezbollah, who killed 241 of our Marines in Lebanon.
In Lebanon, we haven't forgotten that.
Is licensed and able to raise funds as a recognized charity group in the European Union, and nothing's been done about that. So, I mean, this is all part of a larger, many-leveled war against the terrorists that as we see, is much better to take place on their turf than having it take place on our turf by being defensive in a defensive crouch and waiting for another 9/11, trying to seal the borders off.
Right.
That doesn't work.
Speaking of that, since you serve on the 9/11 Commission, a question about fears a lot of Americans had, that once we went into war, that there would be some sort of terrorist reprisal attack here on the United States. It hasn't happened. Do you think that we can relax and say, okay, it's not going to happen now?
Well, I think we have to learn to live with the reality that we are vulnerable to terrorist attacks. I don't believe on the scale of 9/11 now that we're eliminating the Iraqi source of weapons of mass destruction, but certainly bomb attacks of the type we see in Israel and so forth, that's going to be a reality. We can control it. But the way to control it is precisely the strategy that's being pursued, which is to go over and preempt where they're training, to drain the swamp, to stop the European Union from allowing these terrorist groups to raise money in Europe. And frankly, I'm much happier seeing these truckloads of martyrs, fanatics, going from Syria into Baghdad that otherwise might be getting on planes to come to JFK.
Yeah.
So that illustrates why, you know, the only good defense for this kind of a threat is a very good, sustained, and active offense at the financial level, at the military level, as we're seeing in Iraq, at the level of going after the sources of funding and of training and of diplomatic support. I think this has really changed the whole equation, and I'm not surprised that we're not seeing terrorist attacks as a result of this, because we have put the entire terrorist network on the defensive in this war. And this is just one phase, but in many ways it's the most important phase, because it's going to really provide a deterrent and make life a lot more difficult and a lot less possible for terrorist groups to provide the training camps, or to find the training camps like Salman Pak, to get the support of the Iraqi Secret Service, to get the weapons, to get the materials.
Former Navy Secretary, currently serving on the 9/11 Commission, John Lehman, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Coming up, the battle for the southern Iraqi city of Basra. After weeks of pounding Basra, British troops say it will be under their control very shortly. We're going to tell you some more details coming up next year on the source for real journalism, fair and balanced, the Fox News Channel.
Captioning for this program is brought to you by...
I'm a pharmacist with arthritis, so I use doctor-recommended Capsaicin HP. Capsaicin starts strong and gets stronger the longer you use it. Capsaicin HP raises your level of relief.
The perfect accessory for your right foot. Cadillac CTS. Breakthrough.
Academy Award-winning director James Cameron is about to change the way you watch movies forever with a 3D real-life journey back to the Titanic. On April 11th, prepare for an unscripted, groundbreaking, historic motion picture event. Ghosts of the Abyss, an immersive 3D adventure. Rated G. Advanced tickets now on sale. Call 1-888-DISNEY-6.
Watch my dark circles, puffiness, and wrinkles disappear instantly. Sudden Change Under Eye does it. It's guaranteed to give you these results instantly. Sudden Change Under Eye Lift.
If you're overweight, remember 2 words, green tea. Mega Green Tea weight loss caplets can help you lose up to 20 pounds without drugs. Mega Green Tea for fast weight loss.
Suffer with scars from surgery and other causes? Then you need ScarZone, the scar diminishing cream to help fade away scars. Your scars need ScarZone.
Hi, I'm Andrew Anderson. I'm on board USS Harry S. Truman. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and you're watching Fox News.
We take you now to southern Iraq, Basra. Its liberation is key. It is Iraq's second largest city. Today, the British thrust into that city from two separate points. William Lajeunesse with some of the developments. He's live in Kuwait City. William?
Well, Linda, indeed, it does appear that the Saddam Hussein regime is on the run. But I want to share with you some information I just pulled out of the London Guardian. It's fascinating. A 52-year-old fisherman is a suicide bomber who gave himself up at the Royal Marine Base outside of Basra. He said he'd been kidnapped by a suspected Iraqi Special Operations Unit. And they said to him he had three choices. They will kill me, the British will kill me, or I will kill myself. He said, I did not want to attack the base because I hate Saddam Hussein and I hate his regime. And the British I see as my friend. I am a Muslim, and killing people is also against my religion. They gave me the choice. He walked up to the commando base and actually turned himself in, showing the Brits that he was filled with explosives. This comes after, 6 Iraqis were killed outside of Baghdad by U.S. soldiers wearing the same headbands and same clothing as some suicide bombers outside of Baghdad last week. But as you said, talking about Basra and that armored column of heavy British armor going into Basra today, at sunrise on Sunday, that is, this huge column of tanks crashed into the city. Basically, about 3,000 soldiers and 100 armored vehicles passed through the city. Resistance was surprisingly light. Small arms fire bounced off those tanks just like fleas on a charging elephant. Now, we had one column that did hit the Ba'ath Party headquarters. They kicked down doors. They tossed in grenades. Inside, they saw pictures of Saddam, some simple furniture. A lot of records remained, but Ba'ath Party members who had ruled really that town with an iron fist were dead or gone. Now let's go to the Brits' best weapon in the war in Basra, these cheering faces who welcomed the arriving soldiers, saying, listen, what took you so long? They gave them an overwhelming response. They mobbed the Marines. They jumped on tanks. They were delirious with joy, saying the Iraqi soldiers had left town in the last 10 days. These citizens of Basra have given the Brits really their best intelligence on pointing out the Fedayeen. Now, on to Zubair. This is where the investigation is continuing into that gruesome discovery of hundreds of coffins containing human body parts and bones, contrary to the initial inspection.